Taj is no symbol of love to start with because it's of lust. People are eating from the excreta of the dead. People are sending out their children as a slave. How much money does Shah Jahan give for the famine relief? 1 lakh. He uses 4.18 crore sum as a commissioning money for the Taj, the mausoleum of his wife Mumtaz, who died while giving birth to his 14th child, and this was a marriage of 19 years. Hemchandra Vikramaditya, when he is lying on the battlefield without any weapon, and that's where he picks the sword and he beheads him. And he's 13. And this narcissistic man gives himself the title Akbar. Akbar means the great, right?
India was called Sone ki Chidiya. What are the numbers exactly?
Our GDP share of the world was around 24.8%. So we have had the situation of GDP per capita growth negative only in 2 eras. First era is 1913 to 1950, which is largely the British era.
Right.
And the second era is 1500 to 1820, which is largely the Mughal era. The 40,000s of the people, the civilians, but they took up the sword wearing the saffron up and down as in the pagdi, and they jumped in on the day of Holi, because on Holika Dahan the Johar had happened in the Chittor, and then the next day these brave men march out with the swords. Just why? Not because we would be waiting in 2024 for the roads to be built, but because they wanted their temples to remain safe. The gods, the idols are not broken. A person like Audrey Trashke comes and says that Aurangzeb built more temples than he destroyed. It so happens that yes, he did for a few, but that was also because the rebel had become so strong against Aurangzeb that just to win the heart of certain Hindus, he had to do it back. There is a Kalika Mata Mandir in Himachal, around 200 black cows, and they had taken a shade inside that Kalika Mata temple. And at the instruction of Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, the 200 cows were slaughtered, and the soldiers put the blood of those cows into their boots and sprinkled it over Kalika Mata and inside the temple.
What made Babur stick around? What was that one thing?
Babur always wanted to fulfill the dream of Taimur, or rather the unfinished agenda of Taimur, which was to
Namaste Jahan, my name is Jayesh Gangan and this is The J Report, a podcast for all your intellectual curiosities. On tonight's podcast, my guest is Mr. Aabhas Maldahiyar. Aabhas is a historian and he has written a beautiful book about Babur, the chessboard king. In this podcast, we decode Babur and also the Mughal Empire. As Indians and world citizens, we have always been told that Taj Mahal is such a beautiful story. But do you know what is the dark truth behind Taj Mahal? Lakhs of Indians had to pay with their blood for the Taj Mahal. This is not just a cushy love story. This is a dark chapter in Indian history. The Mughal Empire did many atrocities on Indians and the land of India. But today, there are still people who believe that Mughals were peaceful and we are children of Mughals. If you are one such person, this podcast will shake you till your core. So without any further ado, let's begin in 3, 2, 1. Aabhas sir, welcome on the show. This is a new podcast. This is the English version of our Hindi podcast. So the Hindi podcast is called Awara Musafir, wherein we talk about people's journey. We talk about everything that is related to Bharat. This is a new podcast. This is called The J Report.
Namaste to all
Namaste,
your
sir.
audience, and it's indeed my pleasure to be on your show because I have been hearing a few show of yours and I've been very much impressed by the show which you have been putting across.
Thank you so much, sir.
Looking forward to interact with you.
Yeah. So in the Hindi episode, we are of course gonna talk about Babur in depth, but this is an English episode. This is mostly for the people who don't really understand what the history of Bharat is. And one of the major part in our history has been the Mughals. Now, people have been saying these days that completely remove the part of Mughals from our history textbooks. But I don't really, I don't want to use a crude word, but I don't really care about their opinion because if we don't really understand who the Mughals were or what the Mughal history is, we actually cannot understand what Bharat is because they were here for approximately 800 years, 600 to 800 years, something like that.
Particularly Mughals 300.
300, okay.
Islamic rule.
Islamic rule, yeah. So it is difficult to understand what Bharat has gone through without knowing what Mughal history is or the Islamic history in Bharat is. I really want to understand where does the Mughal history begin in India? Like, was it the first invasion that Babur does towards India, or does it start even before that?
If you have to get a bit honest about it, you have to believe that it began a lot earlier. It comes with two kind of nuances. The first nuance is that more than nuance, it's more of a revelation that there was no Mughal Empire in India. And it was always a Timurid Empire, which we are referring to as the Mughal Empire.
So they call themselves
Timurid.
Okay.
Timurid Gurkhania.
Hmm.
And the first thing which happened with us in terms of this empire was through the hands of Timur himself. When he came and he ravished Delhi of Anangpal Tomar. And I use the thing specifically often, so just to remind the people that Delhi was not established by the Islamic invaders, but this always existed, and Anangpal Tomar was the founder of it
Right.
in the city form. It happened a lot before it really, it means the Islamic rulers had set their feet inside India.
Yeah.
And when he came here, the slaughter was so ugly. Lakhs of people were slaughtered. And the stories are said that for many days, the smell of the gore, as in the people are killed, so the smell, the decaying smell and all, kept spreading. So it was very ugly slaughter what he had brought upon us. The invasion of the Timurid happened much more earlier. It was only by the arrival of Babur that it got concretized. And concretized in a form that it took shape as an empire. It took shape as a dynasty ruling over here. It took shape as in something which would bring one of the most dark ages for Bharat in the days to come. And they existed here from 1526 onwards when Babur defeated Ibrahim Lodi. And it continued till, I would consider, till Aurangzeb, because after Aurangzeb, the fall had begun. And just to put it on record for people who are listening to you, and the British didn't take India from the Mughals, but they took it from the Marathas. Yeah. So after Aurangzeb, the empire had begun to wane. It had began to get vanquished. It was in the process to get decayed. And a lot more has to do with the people who lived there, where we are recording it, the Marathas, who had given them the worst of the jolters.
In fact, like, I don't really understand why people forget the Maratha history, because they ruled after Aurangzeb for almost like 100 years.
Yeah.
And people forget that. They just whitewash that part of our history and they move on to the British. Whereas, of course, like Marathas used the Mughal kings like their puppet kings or the vassal states.
Yes.
But it's like just bad luck of Indian history that we have forgotten Marathas. But coming back to Mughals, so your new book just came out, Babur, and in the intro you have written this one thing: as I began to dabble the primary sources to understand our past, I got exposed to not only how effective the Bharatiya resistance was to the invading forces right from the period of Umayyads, but also to the atrocities and crimes committed by them that had long remained hidden under the carpet, masquerading as NCRT books. Now, as someone who has studied in CBSE, primarily NCRT books are used in CBSE, and I clearly remember like we had maybe like 3 or 4 chapters about Mughals or the Islamic invaders, but we were never taught about how we were retorting these attacks or how the Indian confederacies were fighting back. What were those moments wherein Indian kings fought back, and also what were these atrocities that you're talking about?
Because we are talking about the atrocities which go back to 7th and 8th centuries, and in my own personal view, a lot of the history around that period has been manufactured by the Islamic historians. When I say manufactured, I literally mean that manufactured means that they created it. It was something which never happened. But this is the nature of this beast, what we know as history, that you have to believe in the sources which are there at your bay. You have to go back to the primary sources. And when I say that you have to go back to the primary sources, people need to understand what those primary sources means. Primary sources basically are the sources, are the narratives set by the people of that period who have seen the events happening live, or have heard exactly from the people who are living in that period and have experienced it. So when the first invasion of Muhammad bin Qasim happened, so again, I have a lot of reservation around this too. I'm convinced that something had happened, but I'm not quite sure whether it was of that scale as how the portrait of Muhammad bin Qasim, a 17-year-old, has been made to be look like that. He was so powerful that he came and plundered, killed, and took the people's slaves, and he was just so powerful we couldn't do much about it. And of course, it leaves you with certain question marks that can a 17-year-old do something like that? What happened in 712 CE? And then when you begin to look into the instances where these stories are coming from, so the first instance of Muhammad bin Qasim has been narrated by Al-Balduri in his work of 895 CE, 892 or 895. It's somewhere between that period. And so it happens around 180 years after the instance has happened.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the first time this is spoken about. So when you see that there is a gap of 180 years, now the question again arises that will you take 180 years to write about such an important battle which you had fought when Ghazwa-e Hind is certainly on the cards, when you certainly believe that Hind needs to be captured? You will not remain silent. It should have been written earlier. Then Al-Balduri's text doesn't talk much about bin Qasim to a great extent. It just talks briefly about this battle. This battle is further elaborated in a text called Chanchnama, which is a 13th century text. So now imagine, instance had happened in 8th century. The first book is written almost towards the end of the 19th century, and you have the final version which talks about this in detail, including Muhammad bin Qasim, in 13th century. So there's a gap of almost 5 centuries. So it took 5 centuries to talk about that invader, the way he did it in details, and just to educate people, or just to make them aware that this was a period when 9, 10, 10th and 11th century, a lot of Islamic texts were being manufactured. Lot of hadiths were being written, and it would happen that more the war, the more the hadiths. They became like a war manual.
Okay.
They became like a more of an inspiration. They were the redeemers, as in that most of the hadiths were written by the slaves. So there was a process that if you have born into a slave family, you will continue to remain slave. So it became as a redeemer in the rule of the Abbasids. After the Umayyads in the Islamic rule came the Abbasids. So Abbasids were commissioning a lot of hadiths. So it gives me a point of suspicion that when these texts were written and it was commissioned later on, which took the shape of a Chachnama, that also may have been the part of the project of the glorification of the Islamic realm or the power.
Right.
Just to show that we have always been the victorious people and perhaps we were never defeated. So that sent out a red flag to my mind, because history is something which needs to be read through the sources. And of course, we had the instances of Bappa Rawal, the king who defeated the Arabs badly, and he would be remembered as somebody most feared among them.
He's also the one who established Rawalpindi in Pakistan.
Yeah, Bappa Rawal, he's the man. And just to give a clue to the people that, of course, we Hindus don't take much pride in having destroyed something. We are the creators. When we chisel like the Cholas, like the chiseling of the gods. If you, some historian had compared the structures created by Cholas that perhaps gods himself have come and chiseled a structure. We are the creators. We are not the destroyers, but we have given the back to the people when it was needed. I'll just give one instance. There was a great Maharana called Maharana Kumbha. Maharana Kumbha took fascination in destroying the mosque because it's not that he wants to do it, but he did it because the temples were being destroyed. Coming back to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, he had a few people in the army who were Muslims. But when it came to the dharma, when it came to the cause of dharma, it happened that when he observed that the pigs, the cows are being slaughtered in the temples. He took it up and he began to slaughter the pigs in the mosque.
Okay.
Yes, he began it.
Okay, I didn't
So
know
ये
this.
ईंट का जवाब पत्थर से देना था, and it's not the hatred for the Muslims or the militias as they called them that back then, but it was more about that if you are doing this to me, we are not going to remain silent.
Right.
Vijayanagar Empire was established by it was more of a rebel or attack against the Muslim supremacy, because the two brothers Hakka and Buka, they were taken as a captive as a slave, and when they came back and they saw that there's a Hindu momentum which has risen up against the Sultanate which is ruling here, and they got so inspired and they walked into the mutt of the Shankaracharya, and that's where they're inspired and they are told that you can convert back, you come to the Hindu fold again, and you establish an empire which will be the symbol of the victory over the Muslim supremacy. It did happen. And so you had an empire which was established to fight against the supremacies of the Muslim rulers of that period. So it was a continual process from Bappa Rawal to say Rana Kumbha to we take the examples of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Before that we have got Maharana Pratap. We had the great Maharana Sangha. So we're not sitting here just to, like, if you take an example when Johars were committed. So it was the Bangals and the swords which fought together. And those so many thousands of Viranganas didn't jump into the fire irrespective of age they belonged to, just because we would be waiting for the roads to be built today. They fought it for the civilization. They fought it for the cultural ethos. They not only bled, but they made the people bleed too. They fought. The 40,000s of the people, the civilians who came in the seas of Chittor, they were all the people who were civilians. But they took up the sword, wearing the saffron up and down, as in the pagdi and the attire, and they jumped in on the day of Holi, because on Holika Dahan the Johar had happened in the Chittor, and then the next day these brave men march out with the swords. Just why? Not because we would be waiting in 2024 for the roads to be built or this infrastructure to be built, but because they wanted their temples to remain safe. They wanted that the gods, the idols are not broken. They wanted to fight for the honor of the Hindu civilization. That's why they came there. So we had been giving this blue noses to the people, and that's why we still proudly wear the kalava or the tilak whatsoever, all the Hindu symbols which exist. Yeah. So we did it. Good.
When we talk about Mughal Empire, so can you paint a picture what that empire looked like? What were the reaction of the indigenous people of Bharat? What was their first reaction when Babur came in? Because there's this very famous web series that is being made now. I think first season is already out, wherein they have portrayed Babur as if he never made any atrocities against the Indians. He was like, his rule was accepted very easily, very smoothly. Like a hot knife goes from within the brick of butter. So I really want to know what was the reaction of people and what did Mughal Empire actually look like?
So I believe that you're talking about the series Empire, and so and because offline we were talking a bit about the mythologies and how. So just to give one picture to the audience, this work of the Empire is based on the work of Alex Rutherford. Alex Rutherford is a couple who write historical fiction. That work is a work of fiction too. That Mughal series, which they came up with, the series of the books, they were the historical fiction. So this film is already being made on a historical fiction.
Yeah.
And you will be surprised to know, and maybe the audience too, who have been listening me around this subject. When I was first introduced to this series of books by one very respected person, as a token to understand the Mughal history, I didn't know that these are the work of fiction till I figured it out from author's one interview that this is a historical fiction where a lot of things have been taken up Abraham Early's work.
It was the same with me because I've read the whole series and my first thoughts were, this is exactly what happened. This is history.
You know how beautifully the author talks about the Kohinoor, the instance, and also that book is very beautifully written, the whole series. And I thought it to be the true history till 2012. And so now when we have got series coming for on Babur, which is based on a work of fiction, and when we have people who don't really differentiate between the truth and the myth and the fiction, then these projects become a problem. But at the same time, I would always appeal the people to really open up and look at the genre where the thing is coming from. We are bit too much into withdraw mode at times. That isko ban kar denge, usko hata denge. I do say that let everything come out. Every piece of art must be put on a wall, right? And where the observer can take a call. Because we have to give a due credit to the human being that we have got common sense. And I'm too confident that common sense is not so uncommon as people say. So people can really make out what the problem lies. And see, there was a period when the people were struggling with the economies. We had to make certain living. People will stand in the queue for the kerosene oil and so on and on, like before the era of the economic liberalization. But still, but still, they had this thing that they are doing something good for the country. But despite that, these all projects like say Mughal Azam, etc., went down well in the throat, and they understood this is a fact because they never cared that what the history is, because they only cared for was whether we are going to get better salary, whether my family is going to do better or not. Because whatever we stand as today is because of the generation which struggled so hard before us, right? It was not their fault. It was more that is how the cause was supposed to be. But in the time of now, when you have got so much access to the information, and again, if at least post 2010, 12 and things like that, then again, if we fall in this trap, then there is a problem. And if we not let the work come out and we start to call for the ban of anything, it's absolutely atrocious. We should never talk about the bans or calling it out. But coming back to your question, which was that what Mughal Empire, or rather the Timurid Empire looked like, or how exactly Babur was. So people certainly fought against them when they came. And it was not an easy path for them either. Before the Battle of Khanwa, when finally Babur gets the free hold to do what he wants to do after he defeated the great Maharana Sangha, before that, one more battle had happened. And this battle was so ferocious against the people or the soldiers of Babur. The soldiers who had gone into this battle, they say that in the dreams they are getting that those, in the dreams they see that those Rajput kings, Rajput soldiers are coming and killing them. They still see in the dreams that the horrifying dreams of those Rajput soldiers. And they deny to go into that battle. The fresh batch of the soldiers go into the battle who had not gone into the early battle. And it was just the circumstances and the situations which made Maharana Sangha lose the battle or whatever it happened. But there was a strong resistance, and there was a resistance. That's why the soldiers of Babur were feeling the heat, what I explained to you right now. And apart from resistance, there was people didn't accept them so thoroughly. And it was more like that people were quite ignorant too, because our civilizational understanding had got this, you can say that it was more like a barrier. And those barrier was that we always saw everything from a Hindu point of view. That if somebody else is coming, he will be as good or as bad as how our Hindu kings have been. We never cared much about it, except for those who were onto the battle. Though we had the instances of Brahmins picking up the weapons when the Somnath was raided or attacked, so on and on. But still, every instance was happening in silos. We didn't knew about the case studies to that great extent because information was not flowing so fastly. So they were accepted, but as in when this empire began to expand, there was a lot of forced extortion of money. Taxation was very heavy. People began to become poorer, and this is supported by the statistics, which we can talk about if you want to, whenever you say, right? So the people began to become poorer. A lot of money was collected in the empire, and there were a lot of temples which were broken, the idols which were destroyed, and of course, a lot of foreign dignitaries were being invited into the court, and people might come up with the case that there were so many Hindus in the court of this and this emperor. But that again is very far of truth, because there were the people from Iran, Turan, all these areas who came here, and they were given some very respectable position in the court, and while Indians were always looked down upon.
Okay. So it wasn't as smooth as it is shown.
Certainly not. Certainly not. There was a lot of turbulence.
When we talk about Babur specifically, so even while I was reading the book, the one thing which I was really curious about was um, before Babur, every invasion that happened, it had sort of a template. The invaders, they came to India, they looted, they fought, they looted, they broke the temples and everything, they broke the idols, they established a vassal king, and they left. What made Babur stick around? What was that one thing?
One factor which is the strongest in this case was the inspiration from Taimur.
Okay.
And Babur always wanted to fulfill the dream of Taimur, or rather the unfinished agenda of Taimur, which was to answer comes in two options: A, Islamize whole of the world; B, establish an empire in Hindustan. So now you are told both these points, but to analyze that what exactly was the reason, you need to do a bit of triangulation. Triangulation is basically a method where you superimpose all the sources, then you. So let's look at it by case. The first case, Islamize whole of the world. This is also coming from the horse's mouth, as in Taimur's biographer Yazdi, who is again his court historian. He writes and explains that Taimur's biggest purpose of life is to Islamize whole of the world, because this has been instructed by Prophet Muhammad, and this is something very important to do. Wherever Taimur would go to fight the polytheist, he will take the prescription from the holy book, and that's where what he will do, whatever the holy book says. He follows the prescription
Right.
very diligently. He's not falling there. Now, Babur always mentions that he has to fulfill the dream. Second dream was that he has to establish an empire, because Taimur couldn't establish. He went back, as he was talking about the template. He went back and nothing much happened. And he was always told by his Nani and Dadi about the stories of Taimur. And Taimur always happened to be like the most inspirational person and a figure to him. And in fact, as we are told, we don't know much that what his father told him, but we do get to know that some conversation was always about Taimur
Right.
and Bharat, or rather Hindustan as they called it. So these were the reason. Now, what gets very interesting in the process of triangulation, that in the part of Babarnama, you come across two instances. One is on the eve of Battle of Khanwa. Eve means a day before when the battle was about to happen, and he says that he's going to stop drinking alcohol, because alcohol is haram in Islam,
Yeah.
and he wants to get more and more Islamic. And he breaks all the canes of the alcohol, which probably were the mud or the earth made pots, and he breaks them, and he says that I wish to break the gods and goddesses of Hindus, exactly how I have broken the pots of this alcohol. So you can just look at the nasty comparison,
Right.
right? Then he says that I have two inspiration. One of them is Ghazni and Gori, and I am the third one in the line. So if he is making comparison with the two of the worst of the idol breakers, he doesn't talk about Khilji. He does not talk about Lodi. Of course, he had defeated him, so we can discount it out. But still, he doesn't talk about anybody else. But he chooses the two most brutal one, Ghazni and Gori. And he
Why is Khilji left out?
because he didn't see him as something. He's not that great of an idol breaker. He was just a
So the inspiration was idol breaking.
idol breaking and the most ferocious ones.
Okay.
So he's very clear at it. So he has categorically chosen his hero. And when he's already chosen Ghazni and Gori as hero, and at the same time he wants to break the idols of Hindu gods and goddesses, exactly how he's broken the pots of the alcohol. So you can imagine that there was a mixture of the inspiration. Of course, he wanted to establish an empire in Hindustan,
Yeah.
but also Islamize and also do the wrong things with the Hindus. He was very clear about it. He was sorted at this point. Now, we may like to celebrate him for multiple reasons. I don't know what are those reasons, but people see it as especially in India, because he was to every extent an enemy of Hindustan for sure.
Okay. When we talk about Mughal, so as you said, it wasn't Mughal Empire; it was Timurid
Gurkhania.
Gurkhana. Um, from where does Mughal comes?
So, short answer is that Mughal term came by the Europeans, and the detailed answer would lie in a bit of explanation. Uh, so the story goes back to Changiz and Taimur. Changiz, I think Changiz Khan, the Genghis Khan, whatever we may like to call him as. These two people, Mr. Changiz and Mr. Taimur, have a common ancestor called Tumane Khan, and they all are Mongols by the race or ethnicity, right? And Mr. Changiz appears in the 5th generation, and Taimur is in the 10th generation. Now, Changiz is a very secular king. When I say secular, a lot of people confuse secular to mean that equal treatment of religions. No, secularism means absolute wall between the church and the state. That means that your religion is never going to interfere with the state. And he followed the same policy. As in, you can follow any religion whatsoever you may want to do. State is never going to interfere or put any sanctions against anything. Yet only 2 exceptions for the Muslims. Exception was that you cannot do halal slaughter and you cannot follow Sharia. If you cannot do halal slaughter, that means you have to kill exactly by the process in which the Mongols or the Mughals kill. And you will not follow Sharia, it means that you will follow the rules, which is the common rule of the Mongol culture. You are not going to go back to your Arabian culture, because Sharia comes from the Arabian point of view. So, in Indian sense, if I have to put it in perspective for people to relate, if the young crowd which is watching it, say that if in India I say that whatsoever it may happen, you can't bring the dictate of Sharia, you can't bring the dictate of Christian laws or anything as such, but you will have to subscribe to the culture and tradition which was always existed in India. So for that, you will go back before any kind of perversion, or rather say the complicated interactions began, right? So it goes back before 7th and 8th century. How the morality was, or how the laws of the people was that way. Of course, we kept on evolving, but the whole point is that we can filter it out in a way that all the dictates which comes from the other part of the culture will reject it and will just accept it. And everything else is fine. You want to worship somebody, or rather pray. Worship is again very Hindu thing. If you want to pray somebody, you do it at your house. Nobody is stopping you to do, but the rules, the regulation, the laws which will prevail, will be very Indian in nature, right? So that is to set the perspectives. Now, Changiz was a very secular killer.
Right.
He killed everybody without asking which religion you belong to.
Okay.
And his killing was based on the hatred for his enemies rather than hatred for the religions. And it so happened that most of his enemies were the Muslims.
Okay.
So that's the reason why he ended up being branded as somebody who is the biggest persecutor of the Muslims. Those certain bunch of Muslims even gave him a title of defender of religion, because he protected certain Muslims too.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that he was behind the Muslims, but rather he was behind his enemies who happened to be Muslims.
Right.
And when the life of the Mongols goes on, comes the time of his grandchildren. There are 2 interesting grandchildren. One is Helgu Khan, the other is Barke Khan. And Barke Khan is son of his eldest son of Changiz, Jochi Khan. And Barke is the first convert to Islam. He has been converted by one of the Sufi. And before he returns from a campaign where he has been converted, so he's in a travel campaign, and there he is converted. He has found Islam very fascinating through the words of that Sufi. And by the time he reaches here, till that time, Helgu Khan has ransacked the Islam's powerhouse, which is Baghdad. Baghdad is completely gone. The Caliph is gone. And now this guy, Helgu Khan, is moving towards Mesopotamia and Egypt. And it almost appears, when I say it's almost appears, it's based on the understanding of the people of that period. They say that Islamic realm is going to get over.
Right.
Islam will be wiped out, and they fear it. And comes in Barke Khan, and when he sees that in the house his other brother or cousin rather is going on ravishing or destroying everything which is Islamic, and he is not the new convert, and he has a belief that Islam is the final religion and the most pious thing which needs to be preserved. He gets angry and he passes the message to his father Jochi and his elder brother, who happens to be elder of both Telugu and Barke, says that we need to stop it, this madness. How can brother go and do this? Then he has said that we don't cross swords against each other in the name of religion.
Right.
Mongols don't cross swords against each other in the name of religion. But he takes the matter at his own hand. He goes on in a battle against Telugu Khan. Unfortunately or fortunately, Telugu Khan loses the battle. Telugu Khan. And when he loses the battle, the Islamization of the Mongol clans began. And also disintegration of the Mongol clan. They are not very much powerful guys that way, like how they were. And though they will continue being the powerful one in the days to come. Now the condition of Christians has gone terrible. The eyewitness account says the Christian woman can't come out on the street because they don't know what will happen to them. And so are any other Christian men. So the condition has depleted entirely. So the secular state of the Mongols has gone into become a sectarian state in terms of it being Islamic in nature. And beyond the generations is born Timur. And he's very Islamized. He's fanatically Islamic, as I already stated earlier, that his one of the biggest dream is to Islamize whole of the world. And he also lives with two dreams. One of the dream is to become the Khalifa or the Caliph. And the second dream is to become the Khan. The Khan again is something, it's not a Muslim surname, but it's a title, Mongol title. Yeah.
So it's not a surname.
Yeah, it has nothing. So anybody who has got a Khan surname, he's basically showing patronage or loyalty to the Mongol leadership. It's not nothing to do with Islam.
Okay, so
that's
Shah Rukh Khan
ironical.
is basically that Khan.
When you put that title, right, it necessarily means that you are trying to link yourself with the Mongol, though you may not be trying to do it.
Yeah.
It has got the Islamic connotation right now. But the Khans were the biggest persecutors of the Muslims. Right. So it's an irony in itself. It's a error of comedy or comedy of error, whatever we may like to call it as.
Right.
Right. So it happened, and he wants to become the Khan, but he can't become the Khan because he doesn't come from the lineage of Changiz. So to solve this problem, what he does, he marries into the house of Changiz
Okay.
and takes the title Gurkhania. Gurkhania in the Mongol language means son-in-law.
Okay.
And being a religiously fanatic, and also he wanted to become the caliph, he propagates a myth that I am been ordained by Allah and I am like the prophet. And the people believe in that myth because back then in the medieval era, it would happen that if a powerful guy says, it is accepted.
Yeah.
So that problem is solved. This problem is solved to get power as equivalent to the Khan. He becomes Gurkhania. And the empire which he establishes, that comes to be known as Timurid Gurkhania. And so when Babur comes into the picture, he establishes the empire which was Timur's 2.0 and which was obviously the Timurid Gurkhania.
Okay.
And his mother's side is from Changiz. His grandfather, maternal grandfather Yunus Khan comes from the lineage of Changiz. And his paternal grandfather comes from the Abu Said Mirza. He comes from the lineage of Timur.
Okay.
So, and of course, when you see the family, when you want to say that this person belongs to this family, you take the paternal lineage because of the chromosome system. It has nothing to do with misogyny or something, but it's more like that. That's how the things work. And also, he hated the Mughals. And it's so ironical, isn't it, that you say that Mughal Empire was established by a man, his name was Babur. And this guy Babur is hating the Mughals so much.
Yeah.
And he abuses Mughals left and right in Babur Nama. He says that wherever Mughals go,
So
there's unrest.
when you say Mughals, you mean Mongols.
Mongols only equal to Mughal. They are equivalent word.
Right.
So Mughal is a corrupted form of Mongol.
Okay. So what does he write in Baburnama about Mughals?
They are the bad people. They wherever they go, they bring unrest. They bring there's no peace where they prevail.
Yeah.
And here you say that he established the empire. And how they got this name, this is also very interesting because see, the Eastern people or the Oriental people or the Central Asian people connected more with the culture than the race. Race was not so important to us. Us as in the Central Asian and also Asian and Indians and everybody who falls in this part. For us, race was also important. Culture was important. But for the Europeans, race was important, which you strongly see when Nazism comes into the power. Or rather, we should call them National Socialist, because they never called themselves Nazis. It's only communists who began to call them Nazi, because socialists look like so they were National Socialist. So it became so intensive there. But in the earlier writings of them too, you will find that they are all fighting to understand what is racial purity, what race a person comes from. So when Europeans began to write about these people, after they got into their courts, say of Jahangir and say in the court of Akbar, etc., they began to address them as Mongol, because they indeed has the ethnicity of Mongol. So though they never called themselves Mongol, because culture is more important to them, and Timuride culture is more Persianized, and the Persian culture is diametrically opposite to the Mongol culture, right? And that's the reason why when he established the empire, he called it Timurid Gurkhania, and as we noted earlier, he abused the Mughals. He hated them. And when we began to write our history books, we copied exactly how the colonialists or the Europeans wrote it, the Mughals. And also seems to be a conspiracy too, because Mughals are always seen as a very secular, very sophisticated people compared to the religiously fanatic Timur. And this may again be as a truth bomb to the people. But there was a period when the guru of Voltaire, Dr. Locke, was compared with Genghis Khan.
Okay.
And Voltaire, people know for his liberal ideas and the father of the liberalism, etc. So his guru, Dr. Locke, was Locke or Locke, as whatever. He was compared with the Chengiz, and their philosophies were seen parallel. And this has been quoted by a famous historian called Gibbon, who wrote a famous work around the Roman Empire. And he says that you can confirm that the ideas of Dr. Locke and Chengiz were same. And European world was very much fascinated by Chengiz, because colonialism's process was very much in line with what they wanted to do. They had secularism, they had expansionism. So even killing people appeared like a virtue. It was nothing wrong that you are expanding, you have to do it. And secularism had also begun to become a virtue for them, right? So if you say that they were Mughals and you don't connect with Timur, so when you start reading about the Mongols, you see the sophisticated civilization and etc. But the moment you read about Timur, he's a marauder. He kills, and he kills in the name of religion. It doesn't go down well in your throat, even in the morality of current times. So it looks most like a conspiracy too. But whatsoever it may be, it certainly is wrong to call the empire established by Babur as the Mughal Empire.
It is weird that Babur hated the Mughal Empire and call it like history's. I don't know what is the right word for it, but then history took a revenge with Babur. Like we started calling the empire as Mughal Empire.
Yeah, and there are many more such instances because you said it. So I just quoted on a lighter note that once Akbar had dug out or exhumated or taken out the order to take out the body of a Shia saint who was buried in the close proximity to where Amir Khusro was buried. Amir Khusro was a Sunni.
Yeah.
So Akbar was so dejected to see it. He said that how can you bury a heretic Shia by the side of such a pious Sunni saint like Amir Khusro? And he got the body out. And so you see the how the history took the revenge of it. Akbar's body was taken out by the Jats, burned down, and the pieces were made eaten to the dogs.
Oh, I never knew
So
about
he
this.
never lies in his grave, and
Yeah.
so they literally took out his body and
Okay. Oh,
the skeletons and whatever was the remain.
yeah. Why was this done?
It was just for the hatred for the Akbar
Okay.
because he was terribly bad guy for sure. He was certainly not as how Jodha Akbar wants to show you as.
We'll come back to this point because even the Jodha thing that has a lot of controversy behind it.
Yeah.
But then before we talk about that, one thing which I really want to know is, and we have touched upon this point, which is religion angle. So a lot of people say that the Mughals were very secular. They never broke temples. They gave donations to build temples. Um, how true is this? And how did they use religion as a policy to rule over this part of the world?
So, this becomes very interesting because one of the, like, even when you start to look at the rule of the Hitler, or even when you see that what Stalin was doing, or you pick any leader, whatever you may like to call them, you take any of these figures. It's not that they didn't had a conformity or they didn't celebrate a good relationship with those people who were their enemies. Right? Hitler did had Jews around at times, and Stalin did had a lot of church people hanging around with him, and Mao also had was surrounded by a lot of people who would otherwise be seen as an enemy as per as a common narrative, because larger good is something which always is the priority of a totalitarian regime. It's always about that, and that's how you make the friends and the allies, and that's how because in fact whole of the geopolitics is so complicated, and so was the history too, geopolitics of that period. And when person like Audrey Trashke comes and says that Aurangzeb built more temples than he destroyed, it so happens that yes, he did for a few. The number is very minimal, but that was also because the rebel had become so strong against Aurangzeb that just to win the heart of certain Hindus, he had to do it back. He had no other option, and it's in that period only when he is having a lot of Hindus inducted into his court, and you selectively choose it. And but how can it supersede his direct farmans to destroy the temples, to raise down the temples, whether it's about Mathura, whether it's about Kashi, it's about Ayodhya, at the multiple places he has done it. And this is the man who went on to such a high level of religious bigotry that he even confirmed for the sex slavery.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a Fatwa Alamgiri. Just talk about it, and he had legitimized the sex slavery against the kafir woman.
Oh.
Yeah, so he's quite sorted at his points. Or perhaps the people who say that, he's so religiously secular, doesn't mix religion with the thing, perhaps those people will be prosecuted first by Aurangzeb had he been alive. He would not like to be called a secular king. Why would he? Because he's a pious Muslim. And when he means the pious Muslim, he sees himself as a Ghazi. He sees himself as somebody who is for a great mission to Islamize the whole of the world. And he did all the attempts, whether, he's giving up 2 rupees and the 4 rupees for the conversion based on the which gender you come from, right? And then he is so ferocious as his brother, Dara Shikoh, because he has given the donation to create the railing in Mathura. And that's where he picks up the thing against Dara Shikoh, and he considers it as a crime. So here you have such a man, and then somebody comes with an example that he saved more temples than he destroyed. That's utter nonsense, isn't it? And in the whole of a rule of these people, the religious bigotry really got to rise to a great extent. Just to cite a few examples, one of the example which is which should be primary, because the nature of Jalaluddin Muhammad, whom we call Akbar, must be understood, because Aurangzeb, anyways, people are quite clear. So, anyways, people are quite clear about Aurangzeb. And it's only been a recent phenomenon that a neo-Marxist historians, I don't know whether we call them Marxist even or not, because the Marxist historian per se, Irfan Habib, was very clear when he was writing his work around the economic history of the Mughal Empire. And he has exposed them very well. Like, right wing likes to hate Irfan Habib, but we should thank Irfan Habib for one thing, that he's done such a fabulous work to analyze the economy of the Mughal Empire, where the extortion is very clearly stated. And it's very clearly understood there's a forced production. We talk about the British to be making people to force produce opium, indigo rather.
Right.
And but here in our case, that is about the Mughals. They were doing the similar things. And so, but I was talking about the neo-Marxists. So neo-Marxists are not even honest to that extent. So while Irfan Habib may deny in the initial days about the bigotry-based nature, it was more on the economy. Okay, plunder was happening, but it was the very nature of the royal people because it's more about the oppressed and the oppressor. That's how things work. But now what has happened? The idea of the postmodernism and the cultural Marxism has gotten into the picture. And it works on the idea of intersectionality. And this that all the oppressors will come together and the oppressed will come together.
Right.
And whoever is oppressed always remains the oppressed. So the literature, what they bring, will always present a case where they will do some kind of nonsense like making Aurangzeb a hero just because he is seen as a representative of a particular community who falls under the category of the oppressed all the time.
Right.
They will always remain oppressed. You can't do anything beyond it. So even if an oppressed comes and says that, hey, I want to do this, or say that, that's the reason why in fact, during the CAA protest and etc., we had seen in the national flag where the Shahada was written. There were many instances where people began and say that La ilaha illallah is a secular slogan and so on and on. So they will go on to defend these kind of nonsense too. So that's why these neo-historians have taken up the task of bringing so much of obnoxious things in front of us, which will never appear as a history at all. And that's where the larger purpose of historiography really suffers. And I wish that the young age of the people who are into the information, because right now we have a lot of information around, you can access just anything. We must go back to the primary sources, at least a translated one, understand what it is about, and see that how or what exactly that king was doing. Like Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, I began to talk about him and I stopped there. So there is a Kalika Mata Mandir in Himachal. And when he invaded the Himachal and he was about to go and attack the people and rain was happening. And that's where around 200 black cows, as Abul Fazl mentioned, they may be buffaloes or whatever, but 200 were there. And they had taken a shade inside that Kalika Mata temple because it was raining. And at the instruction of Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, the 200 cows were slaughtered. And the soldiers put the blood of those cows into their boots and sprinkled it over Kalika Mata and inside the temple. I'll give you another instance. Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar awarded Badauni with 50 gold coins when he says before Battle of Haldigati that I am so excited to walk into the battle and color my beard with the infidel's blood. And he's so fascinated, he hands out 50 gold coins. And we then build an image of somebody like Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar as somebody who was a great example of secularism, right? So we can further dabble as in how the situation comes to know more about Jalaluddin if the time permits.
Before we talk about Akbar, out of all of these Mughal emperors, who was the cruelest according to you?
I would see that, Aurangzeb was, no, this becomes quite not only interesting but very dicey too. Because cruelty on par of what we are trying to define as. Because like I do see ahimsa of Mahatma Gandhi or Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, as people may like to call him, based on their understanding of this character. So even he was also doing a hinsa against us when he said that you have to follow ahimsa even if people is doing. If you say somebody that hey, somebody is going to hit you and you are not supposed to do anything, it's a properly you are trying to induct hinsa upon that person. You're trying to ensure that somebody hits you. And in this materialistic world, it's not a metaphorical world. It's a materialistic world. If of course someone hits you, you are going to get hit and you may get killed too, right? So it is absolute hinsa. Likewise, when we look at these characters, so cruelty becomes a very subjective thing too, because everyone showed their cruelty in the forms which they could. Like when Akbar comes in and he uh, takes off jizya for a while. And when he does that, at the same time, his atrocity on the Hindus is taken another form. That form is coming in form of the destruction of temples, which is going on still. And it has been observed by foreign travelers that in the reign of Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar, the temples have been broken down, and over that, the mazars and the masjids have come up. And this has been observation of a foreign traveler. Then we see the instance where, though Akbar sings this idea of Dine Ilahi, etc., in the later phase of his life, and it is in this period only when this instance of uh, when this idea of the Dine Ilahi comes up, that's when this idea of the Badani declaring that he wants to color his blood with the infidel's blood uh, comes up, and he hands over 50 gold coins, right? So at a point you are seeing that he's somehow trying to make people believe that everything is well, but at the back of it, he's at something else too. Aurangzeb is somebody who people are aware that he's a Sufi fanatic, and I use this word responsibly so that people can start exploring into this idea that Sufism was not something which was great, which was so syncretic. It was inspired from Advaita and whatnot, like how people put it across. So he was a Sufi too, and he killed and he destroyed, and he encouraged sex slavery at the max. But people knew that whom they are dealing with. Like when you're walking into the forest, you know that there are beasts around. You will always try to protect yourself. You will be prepared. And say that you are just walking across in a city, and suddenly a cheetah or a tiger comes in front of you. You won't be prepared because you are of a vision that it's a city, it's a protected place, everything is fine. But how do you counter it? So somehow, the situations which the likes of Jalaluddin Muhammad presented, it was more fearsome for us. And thanks to the Kachua Rajputs, whom people like to abuse most of the times, that they collaborated with the Mughals, they really began to turn the tide for Hindus for a while because they saved a lot of temples. They tried to neutralize Akbar to a great extent, the Man Singh and his son. And they also tried to make Akbar a bit Hindu, pro Hindu. Let's not do more atrocity against Hindus. And in their way, they tried to do something good for the Marathas too, but it eventually never propelled out as it was supposed to be. So I would certainly place Akbar to be the most cruel of the lot.
It is quite fascinating that you put up Akbar to be the most cruelest among the lot, because when I study history, especially in our school textbooks, Indian history school textbooks, or if in general anyone is having a conversation about the Mughals, Aurangzeb seems to be someone who was a fanatical king or an emperor, whereas Akbar is shown as if he's Paramatma himself. Whereas the reality is very different. So let's talk about Akbar as well here. You talked about Jizya tax, and he removed Jizya tax for a bit of time. Firstly, for the audiences who don't know what Jizya is, could you explain what that is? And secondly, why did he remove Jizya?
So, to start with, what exactly Jizya tax means? Jizya or Jizya, there are different words which I use for it. So, this is a tax which is to be paid by, initially, it was for the people of the book. And that's why there was people of the book, as in who all follow the Abrahamic cult. And that's the reason why there's a very famous discussion between Khilji and his one of the Maulvis, where they're debating that whether I have to put jizya or not. And because what jizya does basically is that it gives a protection to the Hindus or anybody on whom you are living the jizya. And then you can follow your religion, you do not convert, but you have to pay this tax to worship your gods, right? And so because Khalji is initially of an opinion that, why do you want to do that? And we can just slaughter them and be done. And that's where he's told that it gives economic benefits and other things, because you're drawing a lot of money from the people just by retaining them to remain what they are. And so Akbar did eradicate jizya for a while, and it was just to win the heart of his Hindu subjects, because the initial phase of Akbar's life was full of a lot of turbulence. And because we began with the cruelty, and just to give an example of the cruelty part of it, before I spoke about an instance where he had got the body of that Shia sent taken out. That is ugly. That's sadist. That's absolute sadist. And who does it? He did it. I'll give you second instance too. When Hemchandra Vikramaditya, whom people call Hemu, just to reduce him from the stature what he was, when he is lying on the battlefield without any weapon, and that's where he picks the sword and he beheads him. And he's 13.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then to celebrate the victory, he sits on the throne, and this narcissistic man gives himself the title Akbar. Akbar means the great, right? So the title was given to himself by him when he sat on the throne. And that's why it also becomes ironical when you say that Akbar the Great. Like Akbar itself means the great.
Yeah.
The great can never be a word.
Right.
So he should popularly be known as Jalaluddin Muhammad. And then he made a minar or the tower of the heads again. He's 13
Yeah.
and he's doing it. So imagine a 13-year-old kid around us. We see anyone can start relating to that who is 13-year-old around them.
Yeah.
Imagine that he coming and just beheading somebody, and then he decides to make a minar or the tower of those heads.
Right.
What does speak of it? It certainly speaks of a lot of cruelty within that man. And he removed that jizya because he was trying to win over the Hindu subjects. And a lot of push was there from the Kachwa Rajputs too. And he had to win their hearts back. And because there has been so much turbulence from the start of his career as the king or the Padshah, that he had to get it settled down. Because if you want to rule over such a vast land where so many Hindus exist, you can't do it without this support.
Right.
And it was a political move. And he thought that, of course, it gives you a lot of economy too. But he saw that he can draw economy from the other means, which will be through the forced production. And as in when we start reading about the economy, the moment the Jizya tax is removed, the forced production increases in the reign of Akbar.
Okay.
A lot of extortion of money began to happen. As S.M. Ikram, again a historian, Irfanavi also writes that one of the largest taxes which were paid, it was under Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. So what help it is even if he is removed. Now imagine the situation. Now the Muslims are already very well-to-do people in their reign. He's taken care of it. And suddenly you say that this is a percentage of tax which you are going to pay. Now the Hindus who have already gone poor because of the status which you have brought them in. And then you say that both the people will pay the similar kind of taxes. Then how good it is that you have removed the jizya. You are destroying their temples still. You are destroying their idols. You are not letting them live their religion where they come from, which is the very indigenous one. And then you say that, hey, I have removed jizya and so I've done this good for Hindus. And I give you the picture of Akbar throughout, like whether it's an instance of beheading of him, Chandra Vikramaditya, whether it's the instance of exhumating the Shia saint, whether it's the instance of he giving 50 gold coins to Badauni when he says that he wants to color his beard by the infidel blood. And so it's a continuous process. It's not stopping anywhere. He's doing it continuously. He's killing, doing the things against the Hindus. The Johar is happening in Chittor just because people in Chittor know that what he's going to do. It's not that they are unaware, right? They are not the fools to jump into the fire, right? So it will be a bit too foolish of us to believe that he removed jizya as a good gesture to the Hindus. There's a lot more beyond this jizya gimmick.
Talk to me about Akbar's birth, because I absolutely want you to correct me if I'm wrong here, because this is something which I read on a particular thread on X, wherein this person wrote a thread about Akbar's birth. And so Akbar is born in a Rajput home, if I'm not wrong, because his father is not there, his mother is with her. So this thread mentioned, I don't really exactly remember what it was, but the gist of the thread was, the father was not with the mother for approximately like 2-3 years. So how is Akbar born? So this was the gist.
This is absolutely untrue. And as I said that, myths comes from both the side, but we take down the myth at times below, under our throat, just thinking that it's in the national interest. There's nothing like that. Yeah. And when you refer to the original sources, Humayun was away for only certain period. And it does happen that Akbar is born exactly after a gap of 7 to 6 months when Humayun is not there. So this is absolutely a mythical idea, and I am just not recalling. And perhaps he was in fact born when Humayun was there. This instance is also there, but this certainly was the case where Humayun being there and his mother being there in a period when perhaps from when the pregnancy was having conceived, they are together. It is there. So this is absolutely untrue. It's absolutely bunkum, and that's why I tell to the people that go back to the sources. And when we retort to certain things which are just hyperboles, what they do is that they do larger harm to the discourse. Because when, see, history is very clear. We know that what the Mughals or Timurids did to us. And we didn't, and it's not that even their character is so fascinating or so great that you need to bring even more mud. Because when something is already muddy, what more mud you want to? And when you manufacture the mud, it would be a synthetic mud. And what this synthetic mud would do that it may just take over all those mud which is already existing over them. So yeah, everybody should get cautious about it.
The other aspect of Akbar's life. So, and again, this is something which people use to whitewash the atrocities that he has made, which is his marriage with Jodha Bai. So, there are like two sides of this as well. Like one side who claim that he was married to Jodha Bai, and he was, I don't know what is the right word, but then again, he was not that a big cruel king for the Hindus because he married into a Hindu family. And at the same time, there are people who say Jodha Bai is a mythical character. There was no one like Jodha Bai. And even if he was married to a Hindu girl, it was Hira Kuwari. So what is the reality of this?
So again, as I say that we have got into this phase of learning history from blogs from both the sides. And when I say blogs, I'm generalizing it, but there are a lot of online sources. It can be my thread, your thread, or somebody posting something on Facebook. And we take the things on the face value at times, and at times on the face of the national interest, as I was talking about initially. That, and we just think that who is bad, you can just make him as bad as you can, and there's no whatever is coming out to make him more bad, you consider it to be true. And it would also happen that if a person is good, you will start picking up the facts which is coming out there, which is getting being floated as a fact, and you will just keep on adding. So negative direction maybe chal raha hai, and in positive too. So you keep on adding that. So happens with Maharana Pratap too, about his height, weight, etc. Right? So both these things does certain amount of harm too. It's good till the time it's a drawing room conversation for us, but becomes a problem the moment this will start making it to some serious articles. Of course, it will not make it to the books because you may criticize editors for being leftist, Marxist, this publishing house aise bik chuka hai and all. You can say all the names, but editors really do a good job while editing the work. They will go back to the source. They will check it if you have not checked it.
Yeah.
And these will never make it to the academia or the serious works. Now, as far as the Jodha's case is concerned, we don't know the origin of her.
Okay.
For sure. We don't know. We don't have much evidence. And when you see that something gets ambiguous, you start talking about it in different names. So Akbar was certainly married to somebody who was called Jodha in a certain text later on, not immediately, because Akbar has been calling her by some other name, Mariam something. I've forgotten that name right now. So, and also the case which is more important for us to analyze is whether she was a Hindu and she was led to remain Hindu. That's of more of interest.
Yeah.
This is not more of our interest that where she came from and whether she was this or not. So we did not bring in Manohar Kahaniya into the thing, which even dilutes the larger picture. Larger picture is whether she was Hindu or not, or she was led to remain Hindu or not. So in the larger picture, if she was Hindu, she was not led to remain Hindu. It is proven by a fact that when she died, she was given a Islamic burial, and we have a tomb for her. So if she was given an Islamic burial, it certainly means that she was converted. And if she was converted, then where does the secularism or the syncretism of Akbar comes into the picture? Nowhere. Second thing is that if she was Malika in Hindustan as she was, as the texts do admit, you can't become a Malika in Hindustan if you're a concubine. You have to have gotten into the nikah with this man. You can't get into the nikah unless you have become a Muslim. So if she's a Malika in Hindustan, she has to be a Muslim. Otherwise, the Maulvis or the Maulanas wouldn't have let this nikah happen. So it's absolutely untrue that if this character existed, she was made into be she was made to remain Hindu. She was certainly converted to Islam.
Okay. When we this is something which I read in the book that you have written about Babur. In the intro, you mentioned this one thing about the Deccan famine, which was created by Shah Jahan himself for the Taj Mahal. What is this story?
So, just as a prima facie, I could like to tell people that for me, Shah Jahan is more brutal than Churchill. Because we all blame Churchill for what? That's the famine which he created in 1943, the famous Bengal famine, where around 3 to 4 million people died. And coming back to Shah Jahan, he literally created a famine where around 7.5 million people died, which is almost twice the number of those who died in the Bengal famine.
This was in 1630-31.
Yes. And the Taj is commissioned in 33. So I use the term specifically commissioned because I don't know the truth, whether it was a fresh virgin structure or it was something built over in a structure.
We'll come to that as well, the whole Tejo Mahal theory.
So we don't know exactly what it was. So I specifically use the word commission. And it was commissioned for a cost of 4.18 crore rupees. So 4.18 crore is a big sum in that period because around 230 kgs of rice 230 to 80 kgs rice can be bought by a certain silver coin. So you can imagine that how much rice this would have purchased you for, right? And then this is a period of 1630 when the governors of the region of the Deccan, that is the south, Malwa, central, that is the western part of Rajasthan and the northern part of Madhya Pradesh, that's Malwa belt, and Gujarat, they have rebelled against Shah Jahan. And they have joined hands with the Bijapuris and the Adil Shahis, who are the enemies of Shah Jahan. And that is when Shah Jahan decides that to teach them a lesson. And he says that I draw a lot of revenue from these places because they're the fertile belt, of which Malwa is the most fertile one. And from Malwa, he draws around 53% of the revenue. As in, if you have 100 kg of crops, 53% goes as the revenue. It's terrible. And so he decides that to send his soldiers and destroy the crops. And they go there, they destroy not by just ravishing or going over it, they burnt it down. The crops and the trees which bear the crops were burned down, destroyed. And when the horses went over the mud and the earth or the land where you grow, it was not stable enough to grow something because it becomes a bit too stable, right? And that's when the crops are destroyed. You don't have enough food for the seasons to come. Rain don't happen. And when the rain didn't happen, the crops are destroyed. That's when the famine occurs. And this has been recorded by Lahori, who is the biographer of Shah Jahan. He's a court historian too. And he talks about this famine. And the other person who talks about this famine is the Peter Mundi.
He was a traveler.
He was a traveler. And he observes that people are eating from the excreta of the dead. He observes that people are trading the goat meat for the dog meat.
Okay.
And this has been specifically said because dog meat is haram. And and you can get more dogs if you give one goat. And of course, the subjects were not Hindus, all of them. They were the Muslims too. So for them, it's absolutely haram. They can't eat. But famine is so ugly that they have to get the dog meat by giving away their goat meat. People are sending out their children as a slave so that they can at least leave.
Okay.
This is happening that time. And around 75 lakh or 7.5 million people have succumbed to this. Right? And this is when this famine has left an effect. And how much money does Shah Jahan give for the famine relief? 1 lakh.
Hmm.
1 lakh rupees is given as a famine relief. And he uses 4.18 crore sum as a commissioning money for the Taj, which was commissioned for the mausoleum of his wife, Mumtaz, who died while giving birth to his 14th child.
Hmm.
And this was a marriage of 19 years. 19 years, 14th child.
19 years and 14 child.
Yes. And so, you can just imagine that, first of all, the Taj is no symbol of love to start with, because it's of lust, and it's beyond that even. It's not even lust. I don't know what it needs to be said as, because it gives you a perspective that first Shah Jahan, Mumtaz was just somebody who could both a child. That's all. And at the same time, it gives you such a sad spot, because the structure is commissioned when 7.5 million people have died. So the structure was built by the blood of the Hindus or everybody, every Indians who were there. It was built by our extorted money, for sure, our ancestors rather, and it was certainly built by Indian artisans, because and the evidence of it comes from Babur Nama itself, because the largest structure which existed in Samarkand was the mausoleum of Taimur, and that largest structure is smaller than the Taj Mahal.
Hmm.
And for that, Babur mentions that we needed the Indian artisans to make that mausoleum. So if they had brought the Indian artisans to make that mausoleum, that means they knew how to do those domes. It was the Indian artisans' trade. And that's why it's a very firm belief or understanding. And even the records do state that it was a Taj was also commissioned. When it was commissioned, the work was done by the Indian artisans. Indian money, Indian artisans, Indian blood. Then how can some politician sitting somewhere in Deccan now, in Hyderabad, has the audacity to say that hum Taj bhi le jayenge, tumhara kya bachega? Like, this is hilarious, isn't it? Our ancestors have bled for it. Our money has been taken, extorted. Our artisans. And what authority someone says that? And what does it even mean that hum leke chale gaye? What do you mean?
Yeah.
It's not that the Muslims didn't lose their blood then. Even the Muslims bled back then. In this case of this famine, right? They were trading the goat meat for the dog meat, and so it happens that I do see that he was as bad as Churchill, or rather even more problematic. And then that there comes our Marxist friends who are all praised for Shah Jahan as a lover boy and whatnot, and the same people will hate Churchill, because Churchill is they were the enemy of the Marxist in that period. And at the same time, these were the people who will put the question mark on Sri Ram and Mata Sita. And because the life of when you look at the life of Sri Ram and Sita Mata, it is so fascinating that when Hanuman ji came and said to Sita Mata that I will take you, and then Sita Mata says that if I go with you, then Sri Ram will not get the opportunity to show his Purusharth. He will not be able to come here, and he has to do it for me. Right. He has to come and do it. And it was more like a Agni Pariksha of Sri Ram. He has to qualify in that. And then there's a man who, for us now, Bhagwan, who travels miles and miles, builds the Setu and goes and defeats such a mighty king who was the devil one, Ravan. And he brings Sita Mata back. Right? And but these Marxists have audacity to call the names to Sri Ram, but are all praised for Shah Jahan, who is nowhere neither an ideal husband, nor he is somebody who has got any compassion or love for anybody, for his subjects. Sri Ram had all for his subjects, right? And
in fact, in your book, you have also mentioned that he visits Taj Mahal just twice.
yeah,
Is it true that he chopped off the hands of?
No, that's untrue.
Okay,
so
that's untrue.
That's
because every time I've been to Taj Mahal thrice, and every time I've taken that local guide from there, and they tell me that Taj Mahal, when it was built, so Shah Jahan chopped off the arms of every person who was involved in the construction of Taj Mahal.
Yeah, and this is so a problem. It's a big problem. And in fact, I do wonder when the guys can start telling the right narrative, because what I told you is the true account, what exactly had happened around the Taj. So let's not even think about whether what it was and what, but this is what exactly happened. And that's when the stories of the chopping of the hands of this, and that also is brought to show the, some way, not the cruelty of the Shah Jahan, but he just didn't wanted that something else can be made. What I have made from Mumtaz, no second should come for.
So they have romanticized even something that evil.
Yeah, and that's where the stories get cooked up, and they dilute where the truth lies. And that's the reason why I tell the people, don't fall for the blog articles and the things. Get to the sources. Otherwise, story will get diluted.
Right. The other thing about Shah Jahan, his daughter Jahan Ara. So now there are these theories. I don't know how true they are. Like he didn't even leave her for his lust. Is that true?
So these are all hearsays. Um, Maybe true, maybe not. Because he certainly had a very good relationship with his daughter, and she took an active part in taking a lot of decisions. So there were a lot of opinions which are being floated around, and of course Aurangzeb is having a lot of problem with Shah Jahan too. So we don't know that where, because in history we can't really accept something as a truth unless it is coming from the primary source. We can always have opinions and narratives of the people. So even if in a larger picture, if I see that, I won't be surprised if that relationship existed. But at the same time, I will not claim it to be the truth. That because a historian's job is to put the fact based on certain sources. There is no source which can establish it. There are secondary sources which talk about it, and secondary source cannot be the bedrock of establishing something like that. And it's so inconsequential. Even if he had it, neither adds a thing to the history of Shah Jahan, nor it, because we can understand his character right from what he did with Mumtaz. We did not go any further.
um, let's go back a little to Babur's time. Now, again, there's this theory which is famous when we read about the Mughals. When Babur defeats Rana Sangha, Rani Karnavati, Rana Sangha's wife, she sends Babur a Rakhi. Is that true by any manner?
It's absolutely a figment of imagination.
Okay.
Never,
Why
nothing
was
like-
this propelled?
This was again, like Diwali was given to you by Jahanpana Akbar, right? So Raksha Bandhan was given to you by the Mughals again. And these are, become so inconsequential too. What the narrative makers do, they tie you in some kind of folkloric stories, which can trigger some kind of battles and the what you can say, the intellectual the disagreements among the people. Everyone will but just for a while, just to imagine that, even if say that Raksha Bandhan was sent, right, does it bail out Babur from what he did? And can anybody imagine for a while that he would be making a sister and a brother relationship with somebody, fearing home? The people have committed Johar. It happened
Right.
after the Battle of Khanwa. There was one more Battle of Chanderi, where everybody committed the Johar. Certainly, it doesn't let you believe that he would have held that relationship. Here is a man who pledges to break down the Hindu idols as he broke the pots of the wines. And we are taken aback by the stories of the Raksha Bandhan. We have no primary sources whatsoever to justify it. And it only takes away the
So could you come a little ahead?
it only takes away the piousness of the festival, which goes back to the times we don't know when Raksha Bandhan began.
Right.
And it tries to give a new picture to whole of all of festivals. Like I spoke about Deepavali, even for the Holi they will have some narrative. They will have narrative for each and every festival of yours, and somehow it will feel that maybe that we are not old enough. We are certainly a civilization which perhaps began to live and breathe only in 1000 CE. We never had anything before it. So these all are just hearsays. like how was about the Jodha too, or the relationship between Shah Jahan and his daughter. But we must read them, we must verify them, and then we can get to know more about it.
So this reminds me, since you talked about Jodha, Akbar had this policy of marry or die. What was this policy exactly?
This was not exactly the policy as such. It would just happen that when he goes into the battle, he takes the female as a concubine. He brings them into the harem, and that's why in the Chittor so many just committed the Johar on the eve of Holi, that is on Holika Dahan day, right? And she had a very peculiar law though, which was about that if you walk into the public space without the veil, you will be made a prostitute. He had this law. It is Jahanpana Akbar for you. He had this law. And in fact, he also had a law that if a female doesn't tell the things truthfully to his husband, and husband feels that the female is telling a lie, she also will be made a prostitute.
Okay. So women had no rights.
And this is coming from the account of Badauni. Badauni, who is a court historian for.
This is something very interesting, as in a lot of people have been making controversies and have been talking about this particular film called Animal, because it has a very weird father-son relationship. When we look at the Mughals, they have the major father issue thing. If someone had to clinically observe them, they would, I don't know what their reaction would be, but in the lineage, every person has father issues and they actually battle or fight against their own fathers. What is this thing exactly?
Except Akbar.
Except Akbar. Okay.
Akbar to some extent, Babur too. But yeah, then onwards it has always because the people say the Timurids, to be precise, they were also conscious about sitting on that peacock throne after when the peacock throne comes into the picture. And they were so fascinated and dazzled by this idea that we are going to be the ruler of Hindustan. They wanted to they were seduced by the idea of the throne largely. And the way the female of the harems, as in where the female of the Mughal Empire or the Timurid Empire, they operated, they always inspired somebody or other to become the powerful one. And it would be very wrong to say that women had no right. Women were actually very powerful inside the Mughal Empire. They were.
I'll come back to this particular thing. Yeah.
But the more they added a lot of poison to the environment too. As in, they will really induce a prince to overshadow his father and grow up to become the king. And this can be observed all throughout, right from the era of Jahangir to Shah Jahan to on and on. It is very clearly seen through the primary sources. And the example which you gave about the film Animal, somehow, though we are laughing it out today, but it very well relates to it. You can see that that's how the relationship was, because the kings were the king, they're the powerful guys of the lot. And the prince were the prince who have grown up with all the kind of luxuries and they have. And it would happen like Aurangzeb became a spoiled brat too. Because his father never cared for him. Shah Jahan always antagonized him. And he would be sent out for the punishment posting, say in the places in the northeast, and the parts where you're not supposed to go. It's always the punishment postings.
Right.
And he always observed that something is wrong happening with him. And that is one major reason that a lot of vitriol was added in his mind against his father, that is Shah Jahan. That's why he hated everybody. He hated the wives of his father. He hated everyone around. Like when you look at Babur in the contrast, he's a very family man. He cares for everybody. As soon as you come to Aurangzeb, he is a rebel against everybody because his father has treated him so badly. And I won't try to discount Aurangzeb for what all he did by saying that he was perhaps the result of the circumstances which his father created for him. But there were certainly circumstances which added a lot more vitriol and it made Aurangzeb what he was. it certainly happened. And
Right.
when you're trying to take example of the film Animal, then relationship between Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb can be a perfect example actually.
Okay. Since you talked about women, who were the most powerful women in the Timurid Gurkhayan Empire?
If you have to say that one of the most powerful would be Gulbadan Begum.
Okay, who was she?
Gulbadan is the daughter of Babur, sister of Humayun, and she is the crown maker or say the king maker. And she's a very powerful one. And in fact, when Humayun is facing the most turbulent times, she stands as one of those character because Humayun has lost everything, and now again the empire needs to be reestablished and reseen, and it is happening in a period when Babur has just established it and it has still not swelled or expanded enough. It's quite small. It's just 7 to 10% of the land, and then he loses them as well what he had. And then the person who comes out as an anchor to Humayun was his sister Gulbadan Begum. She even wrote Humayun Nama. She in fact also wrote about Babur in that, and she was a very intelligent person. She knew a lot of languages. She wrote and she also translated a lot of other works into from Turkic to Farsi and so on. So I would see her as one of the most important character, not only important but a very powerful one, because she had a lot of contribution in making Akbar Jalaluddin Muhammad what he was.
So, when we talk about this whole empire, we of course cannot ignore the whole Kohinoor thing. So, what is the origin story of Kohinoor? Because these days everyone talks about ki it is in that British museum and we should get it back and everything. But what is the origin? Where did Kohinoor actually come from in this whole story?
So Kohinoor becomes very pivotal because, of course, it was one of the most fascinating gem which people had seen ever because of the size. It was huge, massive, and it also goes as a tale that whoever owns the Kohinoor never owns the peace.
Yeah, Blood Kohinoor. It's a very peculiar saying about this whole empire.
Yeah, and so lot before the Mughals had got the accession of it, it allied with somebody else, and the root goes back to the Golcondas, where it came from. Historically, I'm not because there's a lot of theories and the story around it. A lot of people say that it was given. It was an exchange between Jamwant and Sri Krishna. So Jamwant is from Ramayana period, and so Sri Krishna is in this period, and so people have those stories too, the folklores. But it really originates in the region of Golconda around 7 to 8 century, around that period, and it kept on passing from whoever abducts it or takes it away and passes on with its own bad luck for the people. And right now, and even when it passed on to the British Empire, they never had good times. Actually, if you see the lineage and how and what it happened, yeah.
Right. So, how big is the stone?
I don't recall the size, but it's certainly too huge from the imagination what we can make. Like, I don't remember the size. Sure,
Do you have any numbers? Like, what would it cost in the modern times?
not right now.
Okay. The other thing which I really wanted to know from you is everyone talks about how when the Mughals came to India or the Timurids came to India, forceful conversions started happening. But then I was speaking with Mr. Abhijit Iyer Mitra in our Hindi podcast, and he mentioned in West Bengal or that region, whatever it was called during those times, people were not really forced. They actually wanted to convert by their own will. So speak about this as well. And in general, were there a lot of forceful conversions happening in India?
See, there's an induced force and there's force. So I give you example of the conversation between Khalji and Alauddin Khalji and one of his master, or say the Maulvi, where there's a debate around whether we need to take jizya or not. Because if you take jizya, then a person is free to not convert, right? And now just superimpose it with the idea what Aurangzeb has propagated, that 4 rupees is to be given to the male and 2 rupees for the female to get converted. So in that period, rupees 4 and rupees 2 are not small sum. So it can always lure and induce a lot of people in the idea to get converted, right? And also at the same time, people there's a bunch of people who have softened out, because when specifically the Timurids came into the picture, the India is still a very soft land. They have been very acceptable to everything, except for the initial resistance with a larger scale. The acceptance rate has increased because they have some very polished policies. Polished policies, as in, it will never seem like they are doing so much of wrong, but the back of it, they have some very vicious intention, and that was the rule policy of these fellows, say the Timurids. So they started to introduce the idea of the jizya. It was very prevalent, and it also depends on the which school you come from. Hanafi school. Hanafi school is an Islamic school of thought. There's a different other school of thoughts as well. There's a Wahhabi school, and there are many more. So based on that, you take a call that what you do with the people who are not Muslims. So in the region of the Eastern Belt, there was certain acceptance for sure. There was certainly some acceptance that people, it was more like a lot of experimental projects too, which was happening. And it would be entirely not very true to say that there was no forced conversion. They were, but not to the scale at which it was happening in the other part of the country. And especially when you talk about the northwestern frontier, there were a lot of forced conversion, especially say when we talk about Afghanistan. Afghanistan exactly faced what Kashmir faced later on.
Okay.
So, because Afghanistan was entirely Hindu, and in fact, when I was researching around Babur, and then further when I dabbled into the history of the places which he went on in Afghanistan, say it's the land of the Junbils, which is called Junbilistan, or it was founded by a guy named Rutbil, who was brother of the the person who founded Turk Shahi, or they were the Hindu kings as well.
Okay.
So they're the instance where the plunderers came, they destroyed the idols of them, the Zun god, whom we now recognize as the sun god.
Okay.
The eyes were taken out, and they were forced to submit to the Islam, and a lot happened. They were given an option whether you convert or leave the place and go. It happened in Afghanistan back then, and it's all recorded. So Northwest was certainly facing that, but the time they have established an empire. When you establish an empire, when you want to rule with the people, you can't really agitate your subjects to that larger extent. You have to give the lucrative policies still if you want your ideas to be propagated. Like how India propagated itself. It was through the soft powers when he went in Southeast Asia, like Singapore is Singapura and many other influences which exist there. It was through our soft powers. It was a very polished policies that you talk about the good of your thing and people accept it. And when the Timurids began to rule, they came up with a lot of soft policies. Soft policies would be the example of the Aurangzeb, where he's handing out certain bunch of money, and then they are working in collaboration. That kind of forced conversion is not happening, which was happening earlier, that they will go and say that you have to convert or get killed, right? So that was not the process at all.
Right.
It was more of an organic thing, that how the things, but destruction of temples was going on at a good pace. The idols were being destroyed at a good pace. Certainly, it was not great time for Hindus, though the forced conversion was certainly in a much lower extent.
And the West Bengal story?
Yeah, the West Bengal, because West Bengal is now become the land of the Nawabs and how the thing is going on, right? So, in fact, in the whole Nizam Shahi too, Nizam Shahi is also output of the Timurids, so the Mughals. And this is the Nawabs have percolated the land when they have got certain control, right? They have got the control of these lands. And when you have got the control of this land and you are here to rule, you're not here to just preach, convert. And people do take the learning from their predecessors and what happened in the past, right? For example, what happened in Persia. Persia was a absolute conversion, and in fact, I do agree to a point of view that it was not as so rampage that everyone was said that convert or get killed. It also happened that people really adapted into the religion, because Persia was such a powerful land. The land of Zoroastrians were very powerful people, and somebody comes and says that, hey, in 15 years you will be converted. It's not so easy. It's a very tough story to accept. And this all has got percolated because of the reason I stated earlier. The Islamic history is very much exaggerated just to show that how the Islamic realm was powerful. It was not that they were not brought onto the knees, because I give you the example of Heligu Khan, who was about to destroy them entirely. And it was a belief of the people back then that Islam will not exist because the empires have been going to be destroyed. And then when the Reconquista was done by the Spaniards or the Spanish people, they defeated because the land was completely converted to Islam, and they fought it back. So it's not that there has not been an arc time for, or the time when they began to deplete. It happened. And so they knew that how the things have been in the past. They never wanted so much of rebel or the revolt. They wanted to be at peace. And Bengal was one such land because it's a very fertile belt. Bengal is a very fertile belt. They are drawing a lot of revenue. They are getting all their most of the good agriculture is coming from either from the north or from the eastern part. So they can't subdue that land into a state where you are troubling the people. You will try some other means. And that's the reason why the Nawabs were able to stay there for very long. Like, people still talk about Sirajuddaula in a very high esteem, though he was a debauch. He was absolute debauch. He was a sadist, and he was not a good guy. And that's the reason why Mir Zafar collaborated with the British. And Mir Zafar is vilified to a great extent because he was Shia.
Right. This is one point which even Abhijit had raised, that Sirajuddaula, he is not someone that we know of in the current times. So, and which is exactly why even today, if we go back to West Bengal, if we talk to people in Kolkata, they hate him. They absolutely hate him.
And Sirajuddaula would pick up any Hindu girl. And in fact, he was doing a lot of atrocity against the female folk in the side of what to say, who were the Jagat Seths. So in fact, once he had picked a daughter of one of the Jagat Seth, and he was very agitated. So all these circumstances made people of Bengal go against Sirajuddaula, and they collaborated with somebody whom they saw as a smaller enemy. They did not know that whom they are supporting would end up becoming a bigger snake than what they are facing right now. So they thought that they will get rid of him, and that's how the Mir Zafar collaborated with the Hindus, and the Mir Zafar collaborated with the British that time, because they wanted to really get rid of this venomous person, Sirajuddaula.
Okay. Coming towards the end of this podcast, although I would want to do like 10, 15 podcasts with you on just this one empire, because there's so much to talk about. But then again, because you had raised this point before, in which you had mentioned people should go back and read about Sufis and what their reality is. I really want, and this is something which I have read multiple times, and one of my most favorite books, it's right there, The 40 Rules of Love. It talks about Sufism, and I am inspired by Sufism, but then I also want to know what is the reality of this, because I've heard a lot of atrocities that these Islamic invaders made were because they were motivated by these Sufi saints. So what is the reality of that?
So I'll just leave you with one primary example. Islamization of Kashmir won't have happened had Sufi not been in picture. So there was a man named Hamdani who was a very influential Sufi, and he was more like a spiritual guru and a ideologue to Sikandar Butshikan. Butshikan is a title which he took because he was an idol breaker, and he's the one who destroyed the Martand Mandir. And so the Sufi Hamdani influenced this man Butshikan, Sikandar Butshikan, to not only destroy the structures, to the forced conversion. The forced circumcision happened. People will made to eat the thing which they will not like to because of their religious beliefs and etc. And at the same time, they were made to do everything which will not go in for their religion, just to establish that then they have now become the Muslims. And had it not been Hamdani, Sikandar Butshikan wouldn't have been that inspired to do what he was doing. So he was one of the major force behind the Islamization of Kashmir. And now I'll bring you back to the current times. So Sohrawardi, who was a main lieutenant of Jinnah who propagated the Direct Action Day, he came from a Sufi clan.
Right.
And if you go back and read about the riots which happened in India right from 1920s, say from the period of the Mopla genocide, all of them were being led by somebody who comes from a Sufi clan. It's a common pattern. You can go and anybody can go and check about the name of the people and look at their lineage where they inclined to. And Sufis certainly believe in the Sharias, and without the Sharia, it's said by Ghazali, who is one of the important Sufi, on whose ideas the whole thing got established finally. He said that Sufism cannot exist without the Sharia. Yeah. So, and if you are trying to say that see Sufi as something which is de-Islamized or
Yeah.
somewhat.
Because in my mind, Sufism, and also because of the 40 rules of love, Sufism in my mind is something which is exact opposite of what Islam tries to portray its people as, and the rules and
Yeah.
everything. And here you are saying that Sufism cannot exist without Sharia.
But when we talk about the Sufis, you have got Bulle Shah. Bulle Shah is everything but a Muslim. The moment you read his theories and read his poems, it will certainly come out as a stark contrast to what Islam preaches that way, or what is the central idea of Islam. And this makes it even more interesting. Okay, we are calling them Sufi. We are calling Bulle Shah also a Sufi. We are calling Hamdani also as a Sufi. In that case, whom do we exactly want to refer as Sufi? Because Sufi at the end of a day is just a noun.
You even mentioned that Aurangzeb was also Sufi.
Aurangzeb was a Sufi. He comes from Naqshbandi Sufi. He was Naqshbandi Sufi. So we have had people who were inducted into the Sufism and did the worst they could. And so if you want to see Bulle Shah as a Sufi, then certainly Hamdani cannot be Sufi.
Right.
But as you said that, you see Sufism as something which is not exactly how Islam is.
Yeah.
Then in that case, Sunnis don't want to accept Ahmadiyas as the Muslims. Though Ahmadiyas say that we are Muslims.
Right.
Shias, the doctrine of Shias also don't match with the doctrine of the Sunnis. For them, for the Sunnis, the Shias are the heretic as well. So for one Muslim, the other Muslim is a heretic.
Right.
So it becomes so complex to really bracket out the people in certain ways, because at the end of a day, Sufism is also a name. Sufism is an adjective while Sufi is a noun. Right. But a person who is seen as a founding father of Sufism, Ghazali, says that it can't exist without the Sharia. So whether you want to believe on the thought and the principles led by the founder of it, or you want to believe on the words of somebody who called himself Sufi, but he did exactly opposite of what person like Ghazali stated.
Right.
So it becomes a complex way to really choose that who the person is and what he represents.
Yeah.
But that's how the facts lies as in front of us.
True. I would love to do this one podcast about Islamic history with you, because as we were talking off the camera as well, there's a huge history that people don't really know about. And I don't want to recall what you exactly told me, because it is something very interesting and you had told me that you don't really want to talk about it. But give me numbers and the factual data about economy, like pre-Mughal Empire India and the post-Mughal Empire India. How did the economy change? Because as we all know, India was called Sone ki chidiya. For the Western audiences, what does Sone ki chidiya translate to in English?
Golden bird.
Golden bird, yeah. Or the hen which gives a golden egg. What are the numbers exactly?
So when this Timurids came to Hindustan, our GDP share of the world was around 24.8%.
24.8%.
When they came and when they existed as well, because during the reigns of Akbar as well, till Aurangzeb, it was not so bad. 22, 23, that is how it existed. And our GDP share dipped down below China for the first time in the reign of Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar. Otherwise, we were always ahead of China.
Okay.
But there is one more interesting indicator. But before I get into that indicator, our GDP share in 1000 CE was 28%. 25, 28. 1001 CE, it was 32%. One third of the world. So it gives you an indicator that India was certainly becoming a bit poorer. But more or less, when Timurids were there, it was almost constant. And of course, they were for multiple factors because every other country is also becoming richer. It's not that,
The pie is getting larger.
yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we come across an interesting statistics. That statistic is about GDP per capita growth. So GDP per capita growth gives you an indication of how wealthy the people are, how wealthy they are continuing to be. So we have had the situation of GDP per capita growth, that is a percent, right? It's a rate proportion. Negative only in two era. First era is 1913 to 1950, which is largely the British era.
Right.
And the second era is 1500 to 1820, which is largely the Mughal era. Almost 300 years when they ruled, our GDP per capita growth was negative.
Right.
While GDP share is almost constant, 22, 23, 24. It gives you a hint that while Mughals were acquiring a lot of wealth, they were extorting, it was kept with them. Then the people were not being given their share what they needed.
Correct.
They were being extorted. So people are becoming, while the graph of the empire is almost constant or this way or something, the people's graph is going this way. So it goes like this. And then it becomes much more interesting that you have said that the Timurids didn't carry the wealth outside and they did all for here. It is also far from truth. Maybe that when we talk about Babur separately, we'll get into detail of it. But it is also true that even if they kept the wealth here, which is also statistics is telling you that 24, 23, 24 is the GDP share of the country or Hindustan. But GDP per capita growth of people reducing, it really tells you that they were absolutely keeping the money, but nothing spending on the people. It's going somewhere else.
Where was it going?
It was going to Makkah. It was going in their own pockets. They were they were celebrating some big parties. They literally did big parties. The Mughal parties were known for its luxuries and what they brought on the table.
I think in the book you have mentioned it somewhere in the very initial pages that the whole tax which was collected, it was distributed amongst just, I don't know, like there was the very small number, like 100, 200 people, which were like the officials of the Mughals.
Yeah. So around 20% of the wealth went on only for the officials of the Mughal Empire. 18 to 20%. So that doesn't that speak aloud of it that where the wealth is going? Imagine that of all the GDP what you have, 20% goes just for taking care of the bureaucrats and the people, right? And what happens to you then?
We talked about the rise of this empire. We also talked about the atrocities. We talked about how it moved on from one emperor to another. For one, I really want to know this, and this would be the last question for this particular podcast. Because you had mentioned Aurangzeb, you consider Aurangzeb to be the last in this lineage. After that, the Mughal Empire or the Timurid
almost
Gurkhan,
bad.
yeah, it started declining. And then you mentioned while we were speaking that your policies shouldn't be that atrocious as well, that it motivates the people to rebel against you. Do you think that was the case for the decline of Mughal Empire? Because Aurangzeb towards the end had gotten really fanatic with his religious policies.
He did a lot of wrong things. When I say wrong things, it's very pro-Hindustan and wrong in perspective of whoever wants to recognize themselves Mughals. Because his atrocity was so huge against the Hindus. You can't celebrate Deepavali, the firecracker ban. Today we talk about it, but Aurangzeb had done it. He was way ahead of the times of our government, so he had already banned it. You can't celebrate the Holi, you can't perform your pujas, etc. openly. So atrocity was not just about that I will convert the people, I'll destroy the temples. It had even gone into the place that you can't even perform your puja. You can't celebrate your festivals. There will be a blanket ban on Deepavali and every other festivals. And at the same time, his whole fetish to conquer Deccan or the land of the Marathas, just to take the revenge to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj because he had jumped out of his what he thought to be one of the strongest cell or the jail of Agra, and the captivity rather would be the right word. It really had turned Aurangzeb so fanatic about capturing the Deccan and hence defeating the Marathas. It really broke him down because he spent 27 years of his life in Deccan.
And he dies in Aurangabad.
Yes, he dies in Shambhaji Nagar.
Yeah. Yeah, now Sambhaji Nagar, right?
Yeah. And so imagine that you have got your headquarters somewhere else and you have just come here and spending, say, around one third of your life, or rather one fourth of your one third, one fourth ke beech mein, in some place which is just not your territory at all.
Yeah.
Just because you want to capture it. And his defeat at the hands of Rani Tarabai
Right.
left him broken. He is defeated by a female queen and a man who is sanctioning sex slavery. You can imagine the mindset of this man, and he's defeated by a kafir woman.
Right.
And what mental setback it would have given to him. And certainly he, in fact, towards the end of his life, he develops a lot of diseases and he's mentally also unstable. A lot is going wrong with him. And so all these fantasies which he wanted to fulfill ultimately led to the decline of what we know as the Mughal Empire, but should be known as the Timurid Gurkhani.
Yeah. This was a brilliant podcast, a brilliant conversation. I hope so. People learn something from this podcast and actually go out, research a lot about what happened in that period. They talk about the Marathas as well. And I really hope, because I have Shivaji's Murti as well here. And for me, he is a big inspiration. Because of course, like, I'm born and brought up in Mumbai. So for me, it's natural. But I want that people in Delhi, in Bangalore, in Tamil Nadu, Chennai, wherever it is, they speak about Marathas more, because the decline of Mughals was also because of Marathas. And as you mentioned, that Aurangzeb dies here. First, he fights Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, then Chhatrapati Sambhaji Maharaj, and then Rani Tarabai. So it's a fantastic story as well. And I really hope that people pick up the book as well and they actually get to know the reality of the Mughals. We need to really stop calling them and educating our Muslim youth as if something Mughals did was right, and they cannot justify their rights, the wrongdoings. And as one of your friend, a dear friend, Vikram Sampatji, he has mentioned that you cannot blame the modern Muslims for what their ancestors did, and at the same time you cannot teach the modern Muslims that Mughals are your heroes and the Hindu rulers weren't your heroes. But thank you so much for this podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it too. Thank you.